Good stuff. Okay, well, welcome everybody. So this session is called "Is Writing a Book Worth It?" And what I thought I would do is share some of the things that I learnt along the way of writing my book. So um, essentially, writing a book is a big task, and there are a number of ways to approach it, essentially. So if you approach writing a book with the idea that it is going to be a big task, then it will feel like a big task. And if you start with a completely blank page, it is quite daunting. So when I started to write my book, I didn't start with a blank document. I didn't just go, right, this is what I'm going to do, and this is where I'm going to start. I actually started with an idea of what I wanted to get across. So let's immediately loop back into John Paul's question, which is, what is that level of information for the book? Now, I think when you're thinking about writing a book, it's important to picture the person who's going to be reading it. And like so much of marketing, I think it's actually the most important thing to consider is, who do you want to read this book? Who is this book for? And who is this book not for? And I think before you even start typing out or writing your book, that is the prime consideration. And if you aren't clear on that, in my opinion, I wouldn't start writing it, because you risk writing a lot of stuff that is just no use to the people who are going to read it. So I think one of the first considerations is that sort of, how do you get started? How do you take that first step? And there is an element of, a lot of people will tell you that you shouldn't write the book. Like most people you speak to will go, oh, that's interesting, but why are you writing it? Which can be a real like, oh, because I'm going to write a book. It's like, but a lot of people sort of go, okay, or, oh, that's interesting. And they kind of take a very defensive stance, as if to be like, tell me more about this book, especially if you've never written one before. Then a lot of people, I think, can be a bit down about it, which they maybe don't mean to be, but some people are just quite disparaging. A guy I know, he's got one person in his team who just doesn't think that he should be writing a book. He just doesn't think he's qualified enough to do it, and it's really, really dragging him down. He's been battling with it for many months. So I think that the best person to write your book is you, and I think that it's worth writing, even if you get halfway through the process and then realize that you don't actually want to publish it, you don't want to take it anywhere, it's not ready yet. That's absolutely fine. But I think that a lot of people, especially coaches, have a lot to share in a book, and writing about your method, your work, your story, even, doesn't have to be linked to your coaching work at all. I think the best person to talk about that is you, essentially. So the book I'm going to be talking about today is my book, which is called Reframing Marketing. So this is a non-fiction book. So this is not necessarily, all of what I'm about to talk about is not for fiction. There is a whole different world of writing books for fiction. So if you are thinking this is going to help you with fiction, it almost certainly will not. There's a couple of people I can point you to who help people with fiction books. This is all for non-fiction. So I think the other thing to point out is that you don't make money writing a book. Like, nobody goes into a bookshop and goes, that looks like that book is going to make that author a lot of money, I'm definitely going to buy it. Like, people aren't interested in how much money you may or may not make from writing a book. There are a 1% of 1% of people who publish a book make money actually selling the book. And you can name those people because they appear on TV. Everybody else, it is minuscule, the amount of money. You're not in it for the actual physical shifting of the book money. If that's why you're writing a book, then I would argue that you're writing it for the wrong reason, because, as I said, people don't buy books because it's going to make you money. People buy books because of the promise that book is making. So we're already back to so who is it for? Why are they going to pick that book up? So when you start with thinking about the book, it's all about picturing the kind of person you think would read it, what you think they're going to get out of it, but also who is the person who just isn't going to get it, who's not going to get the joke, who is just not on your wavelength. And once you're clear about that, then the actual process of writing becomes a lot easier. I think maybe one of the reasons that book writing seems quite daunting is if you're trying to write it for everybody. And that's why fiction, I think, is much harder to write than non-fiction, because with fiction, it sort of has to be a broader audience in some cases, not always, but but with so for example, my book is not written for marketing managers. It is not written for people running small businesses. It's not written for CEOs, CFOs. Anybody with a C in their job description is not what my book is for. If you're looking to 10x your income, if you're looking to manipulate people, if you want instant sales, if you want to learn how to make amazing paid ad campaigns, my book is not for you. I've got a very narrow niche of who my book is for, and that made writing it a lot easier because I don't keep having to justify why I'm not talking about quick sales. I don't keep having to say, obviously, if you want quick sales, you need to do this. And obviously, if you want to do that, you need to do this. And I don't keep having to branch off to explain different things to different people. The book flows very nicely because it's written for one very specific person. And so that helps you write and edit, and hopefully helps the person read the book. The first words in the book are, if you're this kind of person, you're in the right place. I'm really spelling it out, really just making it incredibly clear this is who it's for. So that's the kind of first bit, I guess, is I think before you even go anywhere else with book writing or publishing or any of the other details, it is getting clear on who's it for, who's it not for, and what is the promise you're making. So reading this book will help you to get clear on this, will help you do this, will help you stop doing that, will help you connect these ideas, help you understand. Do you see what I mean? Like, in a sentence, what will someone get out of reading your book? And that's not the last time you'll ever write it. You don't have to stick to it, but it's a good starting point. Now, the next thing I would suggest is that you get this book, which is called Write Useful Books. Which does exactly what it says on the tin. A modern approach to designing and refining recommendable non-fiction. This is by Rob Fitzpatrick, who did a talk for the Happy Startup School, which is where I got inspired to write my book. Rob is quite a successful author. He's published quite a few very well-selling books. And I would say he's probably in the 1% of the 1% of people who've made money selling books. But this is him sort of sharing some of the ideas within it, although he's very clear up front, you're not going to make money selling books, but one of the books you might write might do well, and he explains how it works. So one of the things that Rob is very passionate about is self-publishing. So I think let's now jump on to publishing versus self-publishing. So in the old days, essentially, people went to a bookshop and they looked at the bookshelves and they picked the book cover and then they went to the till and they bought it. And then our good friend Jeff Bezos came along and ruined everything. So ultimately, even bookshops are buying from the same place that Amazon buys the books. So what we're looking at here is a completely upended market. If you are an author who does not have a big following, so you don't have millions of followers, you don't have tens of thousands of people on your subscriber list, you don't have probably hundreds of thousands in revenue from selling courses or programs, a publisher does not want to talk to you. They'll probably entertain a quick email back and forth, but ultimately they can't help you. There's nothing for them to grab hold of. There's nothing for them to do. So margins in publishing are unbelievably small. So they don't have time to turn you into the next big thing. They don't have time to go out and talk to you to all their friends and do press releases and blah, 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 blah. Not going to happen. If you've got a big audience, then it's worth their while, because they can go to their friend at the Times and say, look, I've got this person, he's an author, he's got 40,000 people on his mailing list. He could do a little piece about this and blah, blah, blah. And of course it works. We make a website for a guy who is that author, and he's been featured in the Times for the last 6 weeks doing a whole thing about the crazy weather we've been having over the summer. He just so happens to have a book called that's all about the weather. So it's a really good thing, but he's got a massive following. He's been doing a weekly blog for 11 years, and he's got 40,000 people on his mailing list. He sells tens of thousands of copies of his book. He is that kind of author. However, if you're not that kind of author, you're not at that scale, a publisher is not going to do anything for you. They're not going to market the book. You're still going to have to do it. They're not going to talk to anybody about your book, because you're very unlikely to sell anything. What they do is they own the book, and then you can't talk about it because it's their book. It's not your book anymore. That's the key thing. When you sign to a publisher, it is no longer your book. It's their book. They are selling it on your behalf, and you will get a percentage of a percentage, what's left after their cut and publishing and blah, 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 blah. So in my mind, and that's a very short summary of what Rob Fitzpatrick is saying, is that actually, if you want to be left with anything, any form of cut at the end, you will need to self-publish. But the key is, so for example, Rob gives away his book. You can get this book for free on his website because it's his book. So he can give it away. If he was signed, if there was a little badge here that says publisher blah, 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 he can't give it away because you can't give away something that isn't yours. So you can't gift it. You can't partnership. You can't say to an event, somebody who's holding an event, can I put my book in on every seat in the workshop? Can I give this away as part of my free course? If you want to give away your book, you have to buy it from the publisher first to then give it away, because it's not your book. If you want to make an online video course, you've got to license your IP back from the publisher because it's their IP. It's not yours anymore. So I think there are probably publishers out there who don't have quite such a harsh view on that. But ultimately, I'm not a contract lawyer. I don't understand contract law enough to know whether I'm going to start making, you know what I mean? It's going to come back to haunt me. So I would be very cautious about that, and ultimately ask yourself, what are they doing? What are they adding? What are they going to do beyond what I can do myself? Angeli, you've got a question.
Just adding one more thing is they can stop your runs as well. So if the first run doesn't sell, they can take the decision to not publish it at all after. And I think that's the bit that completely put me off, because like you said, you want to share what you've written, but if you can't share and they just decide it's not financially worth it, so they're not going to print it, you'll have to write a fresh one because you can't use anything that you've already put in.
That's a really interesting point, Angela. I hadn't thought of that. Yes, so they're also doing print runs. Very good point. So the print run is a concept which is mind-bogglingly baffling. It's the most backwards thing you've ever heard of. So basically, when someone like Waterstones is going to decide to stock a book, the publisher has to go to them and say, look, this book is really good. I've taken you for lunch. We're all having a lovely time. We are so confident about this book. We are printing 50,000 copies of it. Would you like 10,000 copies? Sale or return? It's no risk. All you've got to do is make little stacks in the front of your shop, blah, blah, blah. They print 50,000 copies of the book. They ship them all out. It's sale or return. If your book does well, then that's great. They print another 50,000 and so on and so on and so on. If it doesn't, they take it back and then they charge you for pulping it. Currently, there are millions, in the tens of millions of books pulped in the UK every year. And you can't recycle that pulping other than to go into newspaper and toilet roll. It's just an enormous waste of the world's resources when we think of all these people that are trying really hard to plant trees, and then essentially people are cutting them down to make books that just end up being pulped. It's a mind-boggling business. Anyway, it is what it is, and publishers are doing their own thing. Shops are doing their own thing. Could they change it? Yes, they could. Will they? Not for this meeting. So what's the solution? The solution is print on demand. Print on demand is a new way of printing books, and ultimately your book is printed as it is sold. So the biggest print on demand supplier in the UK, or globally actually, is Amazon. They own lots of local printing, or what they call regional printing houses. So they own these big book printing machines, basically. So for example, if you buy my book from Amazon, a single copy is printed for you, put in a postbox, put in the envelope, and sent to you the next day. It's a crazy thing, but they're not just printing my book. They're not. It's not like an A4 printer that comes out and some poor person sat there folding it. They are printing massive pages with thousands and thousands of pages on. It's all chopped up, and they're probably printing 100 books a go. These big machines. Anyway, so my point being, I think there is definitely something to be said for being in control of the printing and publishing and the IP yourself, especially when you're a small author. So before we get too ranty on that, I think we'll leave the IP and publishing sector alone to have a good hard think about what they're doing. Meanwhile, the rest of us in self-publishing land, there's a lot of different ways you can publish as well. You see, you don't just have to use Amazon. There's a lot of ways of doing it yourself. There's a couple of companies I found that will do publishing runs. So there is a company called Where the Trade Buys. They're a really good publisher, printer. Sorry, they're just a mega printer. Let's just call them what they are. They print basically everything. You can order the books, and by the number of books you order, the price varies accordingly. So if you wanted to buy 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 copies of your book, it's a good place to start looking, because you buy direct from the printer. You can also use Amazon, and once you've uploaded your book, you just order author copies, and they just send you the copy. So, for example, that is an author copy. It's exactly the same as the copy you get. You just pay Amazon printing. You don't pay a transaction fee. You don't pay any commission. You just pay for the book, and you pay delivery. Amazon also in the UK and Europe print hardcovers, which look like that. So it's a slightly different binding on the book. We'll need to design another cover for it, but ultimately, that's the hardcover version. They are quite a bit more expensive to print than paperbacks, but it's an economies of scale thing, I guess. There's a company called Blurb who will print books for you. The one thing I will say about Blurb is what they don't mention is how much the shipping is. So you go all the way through the whole process, and then you realize that actually your customers are going to pay £8 shipping. And it's like, that's hard to stomach. Yeah, and you can't subsidize the shipping or anything else. The one thing I do, which I quite like doing, is I sell the books myself. So I order them. So I did a print run of books myself. I just have a big stack of them, which is getting shorter. And on my website, people can buy it, and then I sign the book, and then I post it myself. Now, there's two advantages to that. Number one is that when people sign up, when people buy, there's an option to opt in to marketing. They don't automatically go into my mailing list, but there's an opt-in. And I'll be honest, other than one person who's bought the book from me, everybody's opted in. So they join my mailing list, which is fun. And what I do then is I'm then sending them a link 6 weeks later saying, hey, I hope you're enjoying the book. Do you want to book a call to ask any questions? And I'm getting some good feedback from people to have a chat about the book after 6 weeks. So there's that marketing opportunity for you if you choose to do it yourself. Remember that people have to opt in. You can't do it automatically. I'm doing it with a company called Square, who make a little you can make a little website for your book, but they also give you this little card reader, which is like 15 quid. You link it to an app on your phone. So if I go to, sometimes I take them to networking, depends on the kind of networking I go to. Sometimes I'll just have a couple of copies in my bag. And then if I'm talking to someone and they say, oh, I should buy your book, I'm like, buy it now if you want. And they'll be, oh yeah, sure, okay. They just card on the thing. There you go. You can just sell a book. It's really useful. It's the kind of thing you see in coffee shops and all that sort of stuff. But because that's linked to the website, it's all in one place. So all of my accounting and bookkeeping is done for me. And it all goes through Stripe, the card handling thing as well. So it handles all of the tax and blah, blah, blah. We'll do one little thing on tax. So tax is mind-numbingly boring, but in a almost unheard of act of generosity, the UK government don't charge VAT on books. No one knows why. Let's hope they don't find out. Because they don't do this, books are actually quite cheap in the UK compared to Europe. If you search for similar books on like Amazon.de or Amazon.fr, they're quite expensive. Like it's quite a markup because of that tax element. However, when you export a book, so if I send a book to Germany, for example, you need to put a special customs code in. Otherwise, it charges them VAT, blah, blah, blah. I've written a blog on this bit. So the boring tax thing, I found the customs code so you don't have to. So you just put it in when you're sending it. And it basically should grant your book free passage to faraway lands, I hope. But if you are writing your book in Germany and selling it, for example, you've got to charge VAT, blah, and it all gets really boring and dull. And this is where Square is really good, because you just tick the I would like to charge tax and I have to do it, and it just calculates it all for you. So yeah, it's a bit yes, I will share the payment advice, of course. Yeah, it's tax is just one of those things, and then you get into European tax and it's just like let's not go into that in this session because you'll all log off. Right, so I think that's covered kind of getting started, and it's covered publishing in the sort of high level. There's a couple of bits I thought I would cover about actually writing the book. So before I do that, has anybody got anything? Oh, good question, Lucinda. Yes, ebooks have VAT on them. Who knew? Yeah, those pixels deserve to be taxed. So if you're selling through Amazon on Kindle, then it handles all of that for you. You don't have to worry about it. You can, when you upload your book to what they call KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing, you create an account. I've written this in the guide. And then there's a really, really long and threatening looking US tax form. Oh my word, that is, I mean, it may as well be written in hieroglyphs. It is I mean, the HMRC looks like primary school book compared to US tax forms. Oh my word. Anyway, this tax form, you have to get it right, because if you don't, they keep 30% of your book revenue back in case you have to pay tax. But the problem is, because you're not a US citizen, you will never pay the tax, and therefore you never get the money. And you get one chance to do the form. So what you have to do is Google the questions that come up, and some clever bugger has written a blog that comes up when you Google the questions as to what the answers are, and it just works. I will say this is a lot easier to sell books on Amazon if you're a limited company. If you're a sole trader, it's even more complicated, I'm afraid. So just stick with it, but don't go, oh, it'll do, blah, 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 because you will lose that percentage of the books. Google Books is really easy to sell. You just go to publishing.Google Books. Anyway, you can find it, just Google it, and it's super easy. You upload the PDF, you upload the stuff, and it goes, yeah, fine. And it's happy, wonderful. Apple Books is almost impossible. It's one of the hardest. I'd say, I mean, you sort of have to hack it to get it to work. You need a VPN, because you have to pretend you're in America in order to flip it back to the UK. It is honestly, I've again written it a little bit in this guide I've written, but it is unbelievably difficult. Like, they do not want you to publish your book on Apple Books. They make it incredibly hard. I had to download a old bit of software, iTunes publishing thing, from like this really dodgy looking website to get in, to trick the account into. Anyway, it does work, but and I've sold one book, so was it worth it? No. Don't bother with it. Absolutely not worth it. They know their beat, and no one's looked at that website in 10 years. Angeli, yes.
I did that Amazon form as a sole trader, and oh my God, I looked at it God knows how many times to make sense of what that form was. I'm still hoping I've got it right. I've no idea. But on the note of Kindle, what I like about Amazon publishing, though, is once you put the PDF in, it automatically converts it into an ebook if you wanted to. It's not a fussy process at all. It's just about getting the first PDF right. That's what I really like about KDP. The process is a lot easier.
Yes. That's good. We'll cover typesetting a bit later on, if you like, because that's a good topic. That was a surprising amount of work at the end of writing it. I was like, oh, now I've got to turn it into a book. Fun fact, Google Docs and Word can't print books. Doesn't work. You go to book and you hit print and it just spits out nonsense. None of the pages line up. It doesn't work. And you're just like, how is this? How have we got this far? And they can't do it. I found a little bit of software that does do it, and that will also help you format your ebook as well. And it can, if your ebook that it makes has got like something in it that really annoys you, you can load it up and edit it and then re-download it. But yeah, typesetting is a whole world of fun. Oh yeah, Francis.
Thank you, Simon. This is completely fascinating. It seems like you have to be an absolute genius to work out how to publish a book, which on the one hand mitigates the point of my question, which is, I think my fear back in the day when people were starting to self-publish was that there would be no way for you to know what might be a decent book, which is what the publishing houses used to be in charge of. And so you would go into a bookshop and you know that if you were buying a book, it was probably half decent. Whereas I think the fear with self-publishing is that you have absolutely no idea what you might be buying, and it could be a load of drops. So on the one hand, this you have to be a genius to publish a book thing is probably quite good, because if you've jumped through all the hoops, you're probably clever enough to have written a clever book. Whether or not that makes self-publishing as inclusive as we like to think it might be, who knows, the time it must take you and to do the work you've done. But just to the point about people worrying about whether or not your book is decent or not, could you speak to that in terms of what you might like to be doing whilst writing your book, which is what I know you want to get onto, that might help you to, once the book is actually on the shelves, as it were, have people know that, yes, it is a decent book? Have you got any advice about who else could be saying it's going to be a decent book, or how can you make sure people understand it's one of the decent ones?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think one thing to bear in mind when I'm talking about all this publishing stuff is that you don't have to do it all. I'm just a massive nerd, so I just got carried away with it and just sat there and tried to do all of it. But I kind of wanted to do it also because I knew that people were going to ask me about it, and there's people sort of expect me to have tried it all. So there was a bit of a I will persevere with this because I want to experiment with it. You can literally just go to kdp.amazon.co.uk and just fill in the form, get going, upload your book and click go. And that's it. And that's all you need to do, because then you can just send someone, say, oh yeah, it's on Amazon, that's the title. And then they click buy and the book is sent to them. Like if you want a real low friction publishing, that it's as easy as that. You can upload a Word document to Amazon and it would do its best to try and squeeze it into the book. Not always great, but you know what I mean? Like you can go from Google Docs or Word into a printed book within probably an hour of forms and tinkering. So there is definitely a more streamlined way through it than perhaps I have so far described. So let's think about the nub of your question though, which is, how do we know that what you've written is any good? Why is this not just yet another ebook off of the internet? Well, I think the key to me, and the thing that people really go, oh wow, to, is when I do that and I just physically hold it. And that makes all the difference. The fact that it is printed and you can see it and it's got a barcode on the back with an ISBN number, and people are like, ooh, that's a book. That's not just an ebook. And they always use the word just before ebook. It's really weird. So I think that is probably the first thing, is that just whenever you're talking about the book, just have a copy of the book. Like if you're presenting the book, I mean, don't just walk around with it in your handbag or a backpack or whatever. That would be a bit weird and it would get very dog-eared. But I think also the point is, there are some self-published books which are a dog's dinner inside. They really are. There's no time and effort. And I think just putting a little bit of time and effort into some spacing and like embracing the fact that you're going to have a blank page every now and then, which costs you money. That's cost me probably 1/10 of a penny to have a blank page there. It's just embracing the form of the book, I think, really, I'll be honest, it's half the psychological barrier for a lot of people is that's a real book. That's not just an ebook. So that's number one. Number two is the fact that the promise you're making on the front of the book, or when you talk about the book, is what will tell people that this book is a good book. Because for some people, when you explain the promise of your book, they're like, wow, that sounds really good. And other people are like, oh, you've written a book. You know, they've got no concept about what's inside it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I showed it to my mum and she's like, oh, great, you wrote a book. Do you know what I mean? Like, she doesn't run her own business. She has no interest in doing her own marketing. She was just like, wow, your name's on a book. That's amazing. You know, so, but it's not for her. And that's okay. She was very happy about it, very proud to be writing it, which is great. But the point is that for the right person, the promise is what makes them go, I'm really interested in this book. So here's another example of a good self-publishing book. It's called Hype Yourself by Lucy Werner. The promise on this book is a no-nonsense PR toolkit for small businesses. So what tells us that this is a good book? Number one, the cover looks pretty good. That's not just I've slammed it together. It's a good thickness. There's some good, you know what I mean, credibility wise. Yeah, it's a nice, it just looks, it looks professionally done. You know, you look inside, the typesetting's nice. There's some effort's gone into it, but also the promise is good. You know, if you are a small business who is looking to do your own PR and this says it's a no-nonsense guide, that's worth a go. I think that is what gives it the credibility, is the promise. We then see why we can trust Lucy on the back because she's worked in it for years. And anyway, we'll go through, you know, there's all of the promise on the back is expanded. But I think really it's about, if people are willing to listen to you talk about the topic, then they'll be willing to read about you talking about the topic in a book. And for some people, reading isn't their thing. So they would want to listen to you on a video or or audio book or whatever that may appear, or talking live. But I think ultimately the thing that really sets it apart, one thing that really helped for me, was just having your photo taken with the book. That makes a massive difference. I'm just trying to find a photo of me with the book. Here we go. So on this page of the website, I just got a picture. Oh, why has that gone that way? So that I've just got a picture of me with the book, and that does that credibility piece of that's a real book. You can see it right there. I've got a picture of that and the template. I think the presentation almost is half the battle with books. And it's that thing of, because you're not in a bookshop, you're very rarely seeing it. It's all about setting up well, what is this book about? Why can I trust this person? Why can I trust this book? So I think if you are clear on the promise, people can see that it's a real book, then that helps. And on my ever-growing list of things to do is to find some quotes that people have said about the book and add them to this website. So that will also help. So hopefully that has helped a little bit in terms of clarifying that. So one thing I thought would be useful to share is a little bit around the actual writing of it. So one of the first things to do is to think of a title that you won't use. So generally, you go, I need to call this Word document something other than just my book. So what am I going to call it? What's the title going to be? Now, I wrote a lot of titles. Let me show you the image of, that is my list of draft titles. So I just sat there and I just looked at all the different words that people might use and want, and just there's a whole flip chart page. And there's some really fun ones in there. I just, no bad ideas, etc., etc. So I just thought of that and I just picked one, and it was not what the book is called. It was called ethical marketing revolution is what it started off at. And that was the idea behind the book, is like, I want to get people excited about it and motivated about it. Anyway, that was the title of the book for ages. The next thing you look at is so you need to pick something in order to just get going, to get starting. And you need then, I think you need to have a work in progress title that you can then sort of talk about when you're telling people you're writing a book. They go, oh, what's it called? It's the first thing they ask. So that's when you get to try it out. And some people will be like, oh, cool. So how many words have you written? If they don't like your title, that's the next question. If they like your title, they go, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about the book. If they jump straight to word count, the title's no good, or it's not for them. So the next thing to do is to think about, right, table of contents. What's going to be in this book? So as I said earlier, if you just open a blank document and just start typing, that's a daunting prospect, because you're like, how do I start? Where do I start? Don't worry about all that. Just look at, from a table of contents point of view, what needs to be in that book. Now, the first time I did this, I kind of went through in my mind the process I thought people would follow in order to do good marketing. So I wrote that table of contents and was like, yeah, that seems pretty good. And then I expanded on each of those points in the contents of the book. What that actually turned out to be, for me, wasn't actually a great way of doing it, because it just was too complicated. I was going off on tangents. I was packing way too much detail in. So this is coming back to John Paul's question again of what's the level. And when I gave it to my copy editor to read, he was like, this is good, but there's about 3 books in here. He was like, you are changing gears so often. So he didn't do any editing. He just had a quick read. I asked him for a tone and level check, and he came back and told me the tone was good, but the level was not so much. Anyway, so what I did is I actually decided to teach the book. Now, what I wish I'd done was actually got some people on a call like this and tried to teach it and recorded it. But what I did instead, because that would have built up some beta readers for the book, but what I did instead was just pretend. So I got my flip chart out and I just pretended there was someone there, and I went through my table of contents questions. So it was like, where do I start? Well, you need to start with who. Who are you marketing for? And I just spoke with the dictation mode on my computer, and it just typed out everything I said. And I just spoke and spoke and spoke and spoke and just answered the questions. And then I would sort of play devil's advocate in my mind. They'd be like, yeah, but can't I just jump to this? Well, the reason you can't jump to that is because blah, blah, blah. And then I just typed it out. Long story short, that got to about 50,000 words, which is a lot. That's a lot of book. It's too much book, basically. So then the case was just trimming it down. But actually trimming it down is way easier than trying to pad it out. So it doesn't work for everybody. My writing style is very conversational. My way of delivering information is fairly informal, and that's how I wanted the book to sound. And I'd already gone through that with my copy editor, Dave, and he had agreed, yeah, let's go with that tone. So actually me dictating the book, I think, works really well, because it's literally me saying it. And I that's what I said to him, is I want the book to feel like I'm there reading to you. I'm like, if you've ever heard me speak, you'd be like, oh yeah, it feels like someone's actually saying the book to me. That's how I wanted it to feel. If you're going for a more formal style, then obviously you will have to write it all out. But I can't write in a formal style, so I thought, well, there's no point trying, because writing 40,000 words in a style I don't like is going to be a lot of work, whereas typing it was a lot easier. So I think ultimately the key that really helped me was to just write, just get it out of your head. Doesn't matter if you said it before, say it again. Doesn't matter if you said it 3 times, just say it again. Because every time you say it, it gets clearer, or it's a different example you pull on, or you use a different framing of it, or you just kind of work it in a different way. And then I gave it to my copy editor, Dave, who's like, actually, the 3rd time you said this was really good, so we're going to use that up the top because it's the best way you've said it. We don't need to keep repeating it. So chomp, 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 and got rid of it that way. Anjali.
How many times did you edit your table of contents, if any? Because I think I've gone through it and changed it twice already, because as I started writing, I'm like, nah, I'm not liking the way it's going. And then I go back and I tweak it.
Interesting. I did an initial table of contents, which was me just thinking, if I was going to run a course, so I've got my promise. So I imagine, right, I've got a room full of people who've come to me for that promise. How would I get them from sitting in the chair to leaving that course thinking I've got everything I need? That's kind of how I did it. So I was like, right, we need to start with the audience. We need to then look at what it is you're actually doing. What are they looking for? Then we kind of need to do the trust bit, and then we need to do that, and then we need to do that. And then I was like, oh shit, yeah, but we also need a bit on pricing. So I'm going to add that in. And then I was like, oh, I should really do a deep dive onto the actual product bit, because people always get stuck on that. And then actually I reshuffled it after I'd written it, because I read it and I was like, that bit would fit better there. And if you think about that first, then we don't need to do this. And so that was the joy of being able to do it all in a document, is that you can just shuffle it about. But I would say the table of contents changed right up until I hit publish. Because even when I'd finished the whole book, I then went back and reworded all of the table of contents to be questions. Because then when someone opens the book, they're like, that's the question I've got in my head. And you're saying the answer's on page 86, let's go. But they weren't all very well worded questions when I started. It's kind of like you start with it, expand it, and then go back to it.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, thanks for the idea about the dictation. I love that, because I think for me also, because of my career in teaching as well, I'm much better when I'm vocalizing things. But when I sit down to write, I just find it very boring the way I write. My tone is very different. It's so much more engaging when I'm speaking. I'm going to try the dictation. Did you just use Microsoft Word dictation? Because...
Yeah.
Okay.
I use Google Docs, but it's same.
Okay. I'll check Google Docs out, because Microsoft Word is a little bit slow when I've tried.
You're on a Mac or a PC?
Mac.
So if you're on a Mac, if you press, I think if you're on a newish Mac, in the bottom left corner, there's a little globe key.
Yeah.
FN. If you tap that twice, it comes up and it does dictation. It doesn't work in Google Docs because Google has its own one, so it blocks it. But there's various different tools. If you're on a PC, you can also, in the settings, if you just type dictation or speech, it comes up and it tells you what the shortcut is to turn that on. As I say, Google Docs blocks it, and you have to use their own one. I couldn't tell you about Microsoft Word because it's a native program as well as a web application, so you'd have to see. But even if you just open TextPad or TextEdit or Notes, you can just get it out of your head and then just copy and paste it section by section back in. Yeah, it's all good.
Brilliant. I don't know why I didn't think of it, because I do voice dictation for my feedback comments for all the essays I grade, but I just didn't think of using it for my books. So
that's all right. Yeah. Well, really... it's one of those things. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's the right tool, but one thing I found useful though is to not edit as you go, which takes all of your energy not to click on those red underlined words every single time. But when you then see, do you know what I've spoken 20,000 words today, or no, I don't think I ever did that in a day, 10,000 words, let's say, you're like, there's no way I'm going back through that. It's just not happening. And once you release yourself from the fact it doesn't have to be right, it's fine. And then I did if you do use dictation, top tip, do a find and replace for the word full stop and replace it with a dot. That saved me so much time. Found like 4,000 of them and just replaced, or new line replaced with carriage return. Anyway, so there was one thing that Rob talks about in Write Useful Books is about getting beta readers, and he's got a really good bit of software called Help This Book. And you put your manuscripts, you link your Word document or your Google document to Help This Book. What it does is it creates a special version of the book on a website that you can then share with people who've said they want to read the book. What that means is they can then highlight something and say, love this bit, or too slow, confusing. They can then add a comment. And what it does is it shows you how far they get through reading the book. So when I first did it, I realized that everybody loved the introduction. Then I went off on a rant, and then basically people start reading because they're like, yeah, but I'm really annoyed about this now. and they didn't ever get to the gold. They didn't get to the good stuff. So then what I did is I took the rant, halved it, and put it later on, and just let people get to the good stuff way quicker. And the great thing is, you can just update the version. So when people come back, they're just reading an updated version. You can just kind of update it, or you can make a new link. So that's part of Rob's book writing community. You get access to that. But if you get the Right Useful Books book, you'll learn all about it. And he's got a whole load of thing about beta readers, and he goes into way more detail about it. The one thing I would say is you need to be quite careful about when you do get the feedback, is not just saying yes to everything. Because like a couple of people were like, I don't like that phrase, or that's a bit weird, or that energy's a bit off, or that's a bit strong. And I was like, yeah, it's supposed to be. This is supposed to be an absolute kick up the arse at the beginning of the book. You're like, this is supposed to be that kind of like, fuck yeah, come on. And actually, if I'd have said yes, I think that front section would have lost a bit of the energy. And the people who really get my book and really like it have said, I really like the fact you weren't pulling any punches in that opening bit. You were just putting it all out there. And that, I think, and a number of other people in the community who've also had that experience of people being like, oh, I'm not sure about that phrase, or I don't like this. And so sometimes you have to be a bit like, all right, maybe not. And then sometimes someone will be like, what are you talking about? Or like, what does this mean? You've never mentioned that before. Or can we have an example here? Was the best feedback I got. Just like, example? I was just like, oh, brilliant. Yeah. Example. So it's that really, really helped. So definitely be careful, or maybe careful is the wrong word. Yeah, don't feel like you have to absorb all of the beta reader feedback. It can be a bit of a slippery slope, that one. Oh yeah, Francis.
Thanks, Simon. I want to ask a question, and just before I do, I just want to say that Angeli, I was really curious, let's say, before and Simon and I a couple of years ago first discussed self-publishing versus publishing houses. I was also a snob about this, but it's occurred to me that the time that you would also, in addition to all of the things that Simon has said, which make perfect sense, can you imagine the amount of time you would waste just trying to find a publisher that you could be using to build up your email list, or just do any other marketing things, or going for a nice walk? And you just got to think like, I mean, is it all worth it? So that's just one thing that occurred to me as well. And look, we love Seth Godin. He has obviously chosen to go with, for example, Penguin Business. He's published 1 million books. So the first book that we might like to publish could be self-publishing, but that may well very help with that, going to find a publisher for the next one, if it is the case that you want to eventually be published by Penguin Business or whatever, right? So I just wanted to make that point as well. Yes. And then my question is, and sorry, Simon, if you it's like a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but is there a word count guide for people like us who are thinking about it, for what is a sensible book length or sensible chapter length or something like that? Does that come up in Rob's book as well? And did that help you almost design chapters, or like how many chapters there would be? Do you know what I mean? Like how many words is enough amount for a chapter kind of thing?
So mine is 37,000 and it's 220 pages at a reasonable text size. And that to me feels like a manageable book. You don't want it to be an absolute inch beast. You don't want a doorstep. But then at the same time, Rob's book is very thin and has probably closer to 20,000 words in it. But if we consider maybe what Rob's promise is, Rob wants to make this feel very manageable. He doesn't necessarily want to give you all the detail and overwhelm you. He wants to keep it to the point. So I think it does link a little bit to that promise. What are people expecting from your book? Are people expecting all of the answers? In which case, maybe a longer book in the 30 to 50,000 range. Are you guiding someone through a whole process? That's probably going to be nearer 35 up to 40-ish. But if you're just introducing a concept, you might find that 20,000 is nearer what's applicable. I would say the key for me was to make the book at the kind of level where someone could pick it up and put it down chapter by chapter. And I took a lot of inspiration from Seth Godin's style of writing, which is just heading, few paragraphs on it, heading, few paragraphs on it. Because my hope is that someone's reading it and goes, oh, I've not thought of it like that. I need to go and think about that, put the book down. Whereas if you've got very long, convoluted chapters that are always referring forwards and backwards and need to cross-reference, it almost feels like you need to sit down at a desk with a notepad and go, right, okay, where did that last get mentioned, and blah, blah, blah. So I think, but that's where a copy editor can really help, because the first thing they're going to do is like say, it's good, but I can't follow it. Or, you know, that's why you work with a copy editor who gets what your audience is trying to achieve, and they may help you ensure that your book is delivering that. But as for length, I think it's quite arbitrary, because you could do, like, Song of Significance is a great example. That's not many words, that book. It's just a really big font and there's lots of space. But it's a beautiful book inside. That's not a bad thing at all. Yeah. I think the font's quite big. There's a lot of space. There's a lot of blank pages. I think he's done it's a great job of sort of spacing that out, but that is a book of ideas. He wants you to pick that up and put it down 50 times. Exactly, yeah. So that style of book, a book of ideas, needs to be super simple, no cross-referencing. Like there's one idea in that book he says 4 times in 4 different ways. There's like 4, they're exactly the same point, but they're in different sections of the book. It's not a problem. It's just that's the style of the book. It's easy to pick up and put down. And that's great. That's exactly what he's gone for, isn't it? He is a book of, I'm going to stop reading this right now, put that book down, I'm going to walk away, and I'm going to come back to it. Whereas something like Atomic Habits is the one I've just jumped out at me. That's got more of a flow to it. Do you know what I mean? He introduces a concept, and he comes back to the concept later on, and then he's saying, do you remember when we spoke about habit stacking? Well, now we're going to take that idea and we're going to expand. You know, it's a bit more in depth, that book. But Atomic Habits is twice as thick. So I don't know if that was useful, or you are entirely correct. It's how long is a piece of string? It depends, our favorite type of answer. John Paul.
It feels like there's actually 3 things here. You've got the published book for mass markets on the one hand, and you've got the self-published books, which traditionally often has been just one person writing something and then publishing it themselves. But actually what you're talking about is kind of a middle ground, almost where you have a community supporting you to publish, giving you feedback, you're pretending to teach, and it's kind of a middle way. But there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation there. It's like, do you kind of need the idea or the heart of a book to create the community, or do you kind of start with the community and then find out what works for them?
Very nice question. That's got lots to it. I think there is something to be said for the process of articulating what you want to communicate to your people, and in doing the act of writing the book, I very quickly found I've got no way of describing that concisely. I've got a long rant about it, or I've got something that works, but it doesn't quite, it's not quite. And then you have to go away for a few days and not think about it. And then you come back and try again, and finding that clarity in actually going through the process of writing the book made it then a lot clearer message for me to then be able to take out to the audience. So I decided, because I didn't have a big audience of people initially, to start with, I didn't have like, a 10,000 person mailing list to go like, hey, I've sold a book, let's all buy it on day 1 so I can be an Amazon bestseller. I decided to do it the other way around, write the book and then start talking about it in the content, and in the content point people back to say, here's an idea I want to share with you. This is some thinking around this idea that's added a bit of detail to it. If you want more, I've written a book about it, and this is where you can go and buy that book. And that, to me, has been a really rewarding way of doing it, because a lot of people say, oh, I've seen your content, that's really interesting, and I've bought the book just off the back of watching that video or reading that post you did on LinkedIn, because I liked that idea. And I was like, you've got a whole book of those ideas, I'm in. So I think there's definitely something about the process of writing it that helps you get clear on what it is you're trying to articulate and how you're going to articulate it. And even if you don't tell anybody you're writing it, you just go, right, okay, let's imagine I've got that room full of people. What do I want to teach them? And you just go through the process of getting it out of your mind and onto the page. And then you start editing it down. You may find that actually it's not enough for a book. It's just what you've done is you've just made your method really clear, or you've found a way of taking people from here to there and that path in the middle, and you've just articulated it in a way that makes you go, that's brilliant. And let's say it's, for argument's sake, 12,000 words long. That's really good. That's a lovely, that could be a good PDF you could give away. That could be a video series. It could be a short course. You don't necessarily have to hit that print button, but maybe if you stuck a why am I writing this book and what is your next steps on the front, the end of it, that might get nearer to 20,000, and then all of a sudden you've got a book. So I would say it's kind of, to me, it gave me a bit of motivation, because I knew that if I stuck with it and I kind of kept writing it, then one day I would be able to unpack a box of books and go, it's got my name on it. And that was what kept me going, because I've always wanted to do that. And I figured, well, it's not going to write itself. Like the only person stopping me from writing a book is me. So maybe I should write the book. Good question, Lucinda. Lucinda asked, how long did it take? So to get to the point, so the actual writing of the book took 7 months. But to get to a point where I felt comfortable to write the book took about 5 years. So all the way back in the distant past, when me and Ben were restructuring our agency, we worked with a business coach, and he said, what's one of your aspirations? And I said, I'd love to write a book. And he's like, cool, you've been doing this long enough, you know what you're talking about, you can definitely do it. And then that idea sort of percolated, and then I started a new business, doing the training, evolved into BBB, all this stuff was happening, and we were going through, I was reading a lot, I was refining it in my mind. And then the first time I actually wrote through it, it was not very good. It was as I said, it's too complicated, going off on tangents, too much detail. And it was that process of refining it that turned it into the 6 boxes, which is what it is now. So the length of the actual writing was quite quick, in the sense that I already knew what I wanted to say and who I wanted to say it to. I kind of got clear on the promise. So actually the writing bit really didn't take that long, because that was already clear. But if you're maybe at a stage before that where you're still working out what it is you're going to say, then I would imagine that process would take a bit longer. It also helps that I've been working with the copy editor I used for a while, well, a couple of years now, 3 years, 4 years. So Dave knows my writing style really well, and inadvertently, he's been writing about marketing for 4 years. So he's already actually knows quite a lot about marketing, because he's been writing about it for 4 years. So when I gave him, 50,000 words of it, he was able to say, that concept's too big for this. That isn't right, because he had a bit of understanding around what I was talking about, which did give him an advantage in my edit. But if anybody's thinking or looking for a copy editor, I'm happy to share Dave's details with you. If you're watching this on repeat, just drop me a DM or find me on LinkedIn and message me, and I'll happily share Dave's details with you. It's a very good copy editor, good to work with. And I've also shared the long guide I've written all about writing a book, which is is more detail on what I've said today. So if you've got any more specific, deeper level questions on what I spoke about, there's a load of stuff in there, including, all sorts of stuff like covers, designing covers, colors of printing, all this sort of nerd stuff. So yes, there is that guide for you. If you're watching this on replay, it'll be in the link. It'll be in the notes underneath for you. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all we've got time for today. But yeah, if you've got any other questions, then I'm happy to stick around for a little bit now and answer some. If you've got any questions.
So I want to say it was brilliant, Simon. Thank you so much. And I did put in the comments that maybe another session could be about how your products, if you're a coach, relate to your book. So either how does writing a book help you to shape and design your products, or vice versa? How does having, as I think you've actually just spoken to, how does having a really clear method or product really help you to shape a book? But yeah, I'm sure lots of people in our community would find that very useful, because they are going to be shaping coaching products and trying to sell them. And if they're writing a book, the two might work really nicely in tandem, or not, if they want to do something completely different. So yeah, maybe another session. This was brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea. And I think it does fit in quite nicely. And I think there's definitely something in what John Paul was saying earlier with that chicken and egg thing of just, sometimes it is going to be that you need to do what I did and actually try and teach this stuff, or try and work with people for years on refining it and getting it clearer and working out what's just too high level and what is actually just right. And sometimes, you know, I ran group programs for about 2 years before we did BBB, and that helped me see very quickly on group calls what's got people just going, oh my word, and what's got people scribbling down notes. And you very quickly learn, okay, that is too high level, we'll come back to that another time. And all of that learning just takes time. So sometimes that's the learning you've got to do and the process you've got to go through until it gets clear. But for other people, it may be that you either are already very clear on what it is you do, maybe you've learn a method or a coaching style or a coaching practice from someone else who's already done that. You know what I mean? Like if you've already taken a learning and a concept and you're putting your own flavor to that, then actually you could probably have a go at just starting to write that and then take that out to your clients and evolve it as you write it. But yeah, I think it's about finding your own flow there. And I think they're always very complementary. And the thing is, it doesn't really cost you any money other than the time. It's not like you've got to pay $5,000 to get this book published, or you've got to pay £10,000 of printing costs. It's you rather depressingly end up with a zip file at the end of it, and it's like, oh, it's really not that exciting. You're like, oh, great, okay. Okay, now what? And then you can turn it into a book. But like the actual thing you get at the end is just a document, which is, you know, it's not very exciting, but you can then do lots of stuff with it. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of fun things you can do. You could turn it into a product, a group course, a video course, yeah, it's loads of stuff. There's a lot more, weirdly, there's a lot more about that in the book. Sort of quite cyclical, isn't it, really? Also, the product chapter in the coach's marketing journey explains where a book would fit in. There's definitely stuff and places you can find out more. And there is the one thing we didn't get to, which is typesetting. Sorry, Anjali, we didn't get to that. That's all in the guide that I sent you, is my suggestions and mini rant all about typesetting. So yeah, check that out.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank
Cheers,
you so
everyone.
much.